The RICO Act was built to dismantle the mafia, the Gambinos, the Lucchese's, the crime families that had operated above the law for generations. In June 1984, the Department of Justice aimed it at a target nobody had anticipated. The Key West Police Department, a small-town agency on a 7-square-mile island at the bottom of Florida, became the first law enforcement body in American history to be federally designated a criminal enterprise. Not a few rogue officers, not a dirty detective. The department itself, placed in the same legal category as La Cosa Nostra, 22 defendants, a 6-year operation, and the entire time, nobody on the island said a word. The machine that made it possible was older than anyone who ran it. Key West sits at the end of a 120-mile chain of islands connected to the Florida mainland by a single road. U.S. Route 1, a 2-lane highway built on bridges and causeways across open ocean, is the only way in or out by land. The island is closer to Havana than to Miami. Its nearest neighbor is the Caribbean. For most of its history, that isolation shaped the local economy. Salvage, shrimping, military installations, and eventually, tourism. The Key West Police Department was scaled to match. A modest municipal force serving a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, where the same surnames turned up on business licenses, city commission seats, and patrol rosters going back generations. The lines between personal loyalty and professional duty had always been negotiable. Locals had a name for the informal network of familial and political patronage that actually governed the island. They called it the Bubba System. In the Florida Keys, Bubba was a term of brotherhood. The Bubba System functioned as a shadow government, an interlocking set of relationships that decided who got hired, who got promoted, who got investigated, and who got left alone. For decades, it had insulated the island from mainland scrutiny with quiet efficiency. When the cocaine money arrived in the late 1970s, the system didn't collapse under the pressure. It absorbed the money and adapted. By 1978, South Florida had become the primary entry corridor for Colombian narcotics bound for the American market. Miami was the financial hub, but the Keys, with their private docks, mangrove inlets, and miles of unmonitored coastline, were the front door. Smugglers needed a way to move product from the water to the highway without interference. On an island where every boat, every stranger, and every transaction was visible to the local police, the department wasn't just an obstacle to avoid. It was a service to purchase. What emerged wasn't a case of a few officers skimming cash on the side. It was the wholesale conversion of a public institution into a private logistics company, one that would guarantee safe passage to anyone willing to pay the toll. The department's public face never changed. Officers patrolled the streets, responded to calls, maintained the appearance of a functioning municipal agency. Sergeant Carol Key, a former high school football star, visited local elementary schools to warn children about the dangers of drugs, then returned to his duties coordinating the movement of cocaine shipments through the archipelago. The operations nerve center was the deputy chief's office inside Key West City Hall. Raymond Tito Casamayor Jr. had spent 28 years on the force. A Korean War veteran, he'd risen through the department to become deputy chief of police and chief of detectives, the highest-ranking operational officer in the building. On the island, he was known simply as the Man. The title was descriptive. Casamayor controlled the department's intelligence apparatus. He decided which investigations moved forward and which ones quietly stalled. He knew when the Coast Guard was running patrols, when federal agents were visiting the island, and which informants were feeding information to outside agencies. He sold all of it. Smugglers paid Casamayor's network for a package of services no private security firm could match. Advance warning of federal interdiction movements, armed escort for shipments traveling the length of the Keys, and the active suppression of local investigations that might interfere with protected operations. If a rival smuggler was working without the department's blessing, Casamayor's officers could arrest him using perfectly legitimate police authority, eliminating the competition under color of law. The physical movement of product reflected the operation's audacity. Couriers carried multi-kilogram shipments of cocaine directly into City Hall, past the front desk, past uniformed officers, and into the deputy chief's suite. The packaging was selected for a single purpose: to be invisible. The bricks arrived inside branded Burger King and Chicken Unlimited takeout boxes. A lunch delivery to a senior officer raised no suspicion from clerks or patrolmen. It looked like nothing, because it was designed to look like nothing. Casamayor insulated himself from the most exposed moment in any bribery operation, the cash handoff, through a strict cutout system. A civilian named George Carey served as the designated intermediary, physically collecting protection payments from smugglers before routing the money through a chain of transfers. The smugglers never met the deputy chief in a parking lot with an envelope. Every link in the chain was buffered by deniability. The system enforced its silence the way any enterprise enforces silence. In August 1975, an informant named Titus Walters, the man who had helped federal agents build a case against other corrupt officials on the island, was found dead in a bathtub on Whitmarsh Lane. He had been bound and restrained. The message was received across the island. For nearly a decade afterward, no one volunteered information to outside investigators. The department's criminal operation didn't exist alongside its legitimate functions. It had replaced them. The detectives tasked with investigating drug trafficking were organizing shipments. The officers responsible for maintaining evidence integrity were making evidence disappear. When a vial of cocaine seized during a 1983 hospital incident vanished from the department's secure evidence locker, it later turned up in the personal possession of Detective Lieutenant Russell Barker, one of Casamayor's primary lieutenants. The machine ran on institutional authority, and as long as the people responsible for investigating corruption were the ones committing it, the machine was self-sealing. The cocaine moved through the island. The money had to move somewhere else. During the 2-year federal sting alone, roughly 2,000 kilograms of cocaine passed through Casamayor's network, carrying a wholesale value north of $16 million. And the sting only captured the tail end of a 6-year enterprise. All of that revenue arrived as untraceable cash, and on a deputy chief's municipal salary, even modest spending attracted attention. Casamayor was not modest. He had developed a taste for flashy sports cars and gold jewelry that bore no relationship to his civil servant paycheck. The financial architecture required professionals, and Casamayor found them in the same family. Michael Cates was a former Key West city attorney and former Monroe County attorney, a man whose knowledge of municipal law, zoning regulations, and corporate structuring was encyclopedic. His wife, Janet Hill Cates, owned Key Lime Realty, one of the island's established real estate brokerages. Together, they provided the enterprise with something Casamayor could never build alone: a legitimate commercial infrastructure capable of absorbing large volumes of cash. The Cates family co-owned the Conch train, the open-air tourist tram that still loops through Key West's historic district today, carrying thousands of visitors past the island's landmarks. In the early 1980s, it served a dual function. Tourists paid in small bills. The exact number of passengers on any given loop was unverifiable. By blending narcotics proceeds with legitimate daily ticket sales, the enterprise deposited dirty money into the banking system as recognized corporate revenue. The cash went in as drug money. It came out as tourism income. On paper, the Conch train was simply having an outstanding year. The real estate operation was more aggressive. In 1981, the Federal Reserve had driven benchmark interest rates to historic levels, pushing standard 30-year mortgage rates near 16%. Legitimate home buyers across the country were effectively frozen out of the market. The KWPD network didn't need a mortgage. Through Key Lime Realty, the enterprise executed rapid, all-cash acquisitions of commercial and residential properties, bypassing the credit system, the appraisal process, and the regulatory scrutiny that accompanied traditional financing. The goal wasn't a fair price. The goal was converting cash into deeded property that could later be resold as clean capital. The effect on the local economy was immediate and irreversible. Drug money was pushing property values beyond anything the island's service industry could sustain. Working-class residents who had lived on the island for generations, shrimpers, bartenders, hotel staff, found themselves unable to compete with buyers paying above, asking in cash. The island's demographic character was being rewritten by capital that no one could trace and no one was willing to question. Then the federal government tried to close the corridor. In April 1982, the U.S. Border Patrol erected a hard checkpoint on the overseas highway at Florida City, the single road connecting the Keys to the mainland. Every vehicle leaving the archipelago was stopped and searched. A 17-mile traffic jam paralyzed the island's only lifeline. The checkpoint didn't just threaten the drug trade. It strangled the tourism industry, the legitimate economy that also served as the illicit economy's cover. Both depended on the same thing: the unrestricted flow of traffic down U.S. Route 1. Sever the highway, and both economies died simultaneously. Key West's mayor, Dennis Wardlow, responded with what the national media treated as satire. He declared the island's independence from the United States, proclaimed the sovereign Conch Republic, ceremonially declared war on the federal government, surrendered 1 minute later, and demanded $1 billion in foreign aid. The press loved it. The tourists loved it. The roadblock came down. The corridor that Casamayor's network relied on to push cocaine to the mainland was wide open again. The political protest that saved the island's tourism brand had also restored its drug pipeline. The FBI understood that the standard investigative playbook was useless in Key West. In a normal narcotics case, agents pressure street-level dealers to inform on their suppliers, building upward through the hierarchy. On this island, the suppliers were the police. Informing on them meant informing to them, and everyone on the island knew what had happened to the last person who cooperated with outside investigators. The Justice Department pivoted to a strategy it had never attempted against a police department. Instead of building up from the street, they would insert directly at the top. The tool was a man named Hector Serrano, a career smuggler with deep ties to the Cuban expatriate community and a childhood connection to Casamayor. Federal agents flipped Serrano and positioned him as a wholesale supplier, feeding cocaine directly into the KWPD's distribution network while recording every conversation and documenting every dollar. For 2 years, the monitored operation ran. Serrano delivered. Casamayor's network distributed. The money moved through the bagman, through the businesses, through the real estate closings, and at every step, federal investigators built the financial profile that would become the foundation of the most ambitious police corruption prosecution in American history. On June 29, 1984, U.S. Attorney Stanley Marcus unsealed a 51-page federal indictment naming 22 defendants. The charges: racketeering, drug distribution, bribery, income tax evasion, witness, intimidation. The legal instrument was the RICO Act, aimed for the first time at a municipal police department. The takedown raids produced their own evidence. When agents breached the home of Janet Hill Cates, the real estate broker panicked, grabbed a banded stack of cash, and hurled it across the room. An FBI agent caught the bundle mid-flight. $50,000. The kind of liquidity a property commission doesn't explain. The prosecution split the defendants into 2 trials. The first collapsed spectacularly. During cross-examination, a defense attorney produced an active, undisclosed arrest warrant from North Carolina for the government's star witness. Federal marshals approached the witness box and handcuffed Hector Serrano in front of the jury. Without their primary informant's testimony, the case against the first 8 defendants disintegrated. All were acquitted. The government recalibrated. For the second trial, the 14 major defendants, including Casamayor, Barker, the Cates family, and Sergeant Key, prosecutors abandoned their reliance on informant testimony and pivoted to something that couldn't be arrested on the stand. Roughly half the evidence presented over 3.5 months of proceedings focused on a single, devastating discrepancy. Casamayor's spending didn't match his salary. Between 1980 and 1982, his personal expenditures exceeded his documented police income by more than $114,000, a gap the IRS could not explain and the deputy chief could not justify. The prosecution used the same financial forensic technique that had brought down Al Capone, a net worth analysis that proved the existence of illicit income without requiring a recording of a cash handoff. Sergeant Key took the stand and denied everything. The denials were emphatic and unconvincing. Barker's defense collapsed under the weight of the evidence vial that had migrated from the police locker to his personal possession. The jury convicted 12 of the 14. Casamayor received 30 years. He served roughly 10 before parole. The convictions dismantled the ring. They did not dismantle the system that built it. The Bubba System was older than Casamayor, and it proved far more durable than any single criminal network. 9 years before the RICO indictment, A 1975 federal sting called Operation Conch had already exposed the same institutional rot. That investigation took down the city attorney and the fire chief, a man named James Bum Farto, who had been selling cocaine directly out of the fire station from a lime green municipal sedan. Farto was convicted. Then, he vanished before sentencing and was never seen again, spawning decades of novelty t-shirts and eventually a local stage musical. The 1975 bust should have been the warning that the entire municipal apparatus was compromised. Instead, it was the template. Within 3 years, the vacuum had been filled by Casamayor's faction, running the same operation from a different building. And a decade after Casamayor's conviction, the cycle completed again. In 1995, the FBI returned to Key West to indict Mayor Dennis Wardlow, the same man who had orchestrated the Conch Republic secession, on bribery charges. The Bubba System hadn't died. It had migrated from the fire station to the police department to the mayor's office, shedding one generation of operators and regenerating the next with a regularity that resembled biology more than crime. The legal precedent outlasted every individual involved. The successful RICO prosecution of a municipal police department, affirmed on appeal by the 11th Circuit in 1988, gave federal prosecutors a template they would deploy against corrupt institutions for decades afterward. A statute designed for the mafia had been permanently expanded to reach any organization that operated like one, badge or no badge. The economic transformation was equally permanent and equally unintended. The drug money that flooded Key West's real estate market in the early 1980s accelerated a gentrification that could never be reversed. Property values inflated by laundered cash became the baseline. The working-class island, the shrimpers, the salvagers, the Navy families, was priced out for good. The boutique tourist economy that replaced it was built, in part, on a foundation of capital that arrived in fast food boxes. Key West absorbed the institutional collapse the way it absorbs everything, by selling it. During the trial, vendors hawked shirts reading, "I survived the Bubba Bust trial." The Conch Republic secession became a 10-day annual festival. The corruption, the cocaine, the federal designation, all of it was repackaged as local color, folded into the island's outlaw mythology until the line between infamy and brand identity disappeared entirely. The Conch tour train still runs its daily loop through the historic district, carrying thousands of tourists past Key West City Hall on Simonton Street. The same tram that once laundered drug money through inflated ticket receipts now passes the same building where kilogram deliveries arrived in Burger King boxes. The guide's narration mentions none of it. The passengers have no reason to ask. The RICO Act was designed to prove that an organization, not just an individual, could be criminal. In Key West, the federal government proved something the island already understood. The institution was the operation, the badge, the office, the municipal authority. None of it was cover for the enterprise. All of it was infrastructure. When corruption regenerates on a 10-year cycle, the fire chief in 1975, the deputy chief in 1985, the mayor in 1995. The question isn't who ran the machine. The question is whether anyone actually turned it off. If you know of another place where the people sworn to enforce the law became the ones breaking it, drop it in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't. The money always leads somewhere.